Have your Bibles open to the book of Ecclesiastes. And we're going to have a main text here in Ecclesiastes chapter 11 going on into chapter 12. So Ecclesiastes 11 verse 8 going into chapter 12 verse 1. That'll be our primary text. So if you have a bookmarker, then go ahead and place that there at this time. How often do you hear young people justifying some sinful behavior with the phrase, "I'm just sowing my wild oats"? I wonder, is there a proper time in life when living for self is ever appropriate and sin can be experienced free from its consequences? Is it right for us to sow our wild oats as young men and young women, knowing that someday we'll have to settle down or get married and have kids and have a steady job and pay our taxes and finally start living like grown-ups? And is it okay, as long as you're young, to sow your wild oats and get it all out of your system while you can? Do we as human beings, as creatures created in the image of God, do we have the right to devote a portion of our lives to getting sin out of our system? More importantly, is there even any merit to the idea? Is it even possible to sow your wild oats and somehow pat yourself on the back and think that for the rest of your life you'll never be tempted by the same things, or you'll never have opportunity to commit the same sins? Is it really true that you can get sin out of your system just by sowing your wild oats as a young person? And I wonder if it's the case that the more we try to convince ourselves that sin is acceptable, that the more deluded we end up becoming. And the more foolish we look when we follow the course of this world and fall into temptation, and eventually, if we don't change, eternal condemnation. So on the subject of sowing wild oats as a young man, especially in the context of marriage, one writer, Irvin Lee, had this to say in a book called Good Homes in a Wicked World. Lee writes, "The devil himself is the author of the idea that a young man must sow his wild oats. The Bible teaching is very different. The youth who thinks that drunkenness, fornication, and other forms of ungodliness are the smart things to do in order to have a good time and to be popular with the crowd is not likely to find himself happily married when he is an adult. Such a young man is destroying all hope of a happy marriage. God knows what is best for us at every age of our lives, and He never recommends ungodly behavior at any time. So the perfect passage that addresses this is one that takes us from young adulthood all the way into our graying years. And such a passage is Ecclesiastes 11 and 12. So have your Bibles open now to Ecclesiastes 11 verse 8. And let's read a few things. And we'll go verse by verse and make some applications as we go along. So notice here first of all, verse 8 of this text. It says, "Indeed, if a man should live many years, let him rejoice in them all, and let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. Everything that is to come will be futility." Now I like this first of all. The idea of, if you live many years, there's a big word there that only has 2 letters in it, right? It's a big word, but it's really short. You know what I mean? If a man should live many years. You're not guaranteed many years in this life. There is absolutely no guarantee. In fact, sowing your wild oats as a young man might be the very thing that guarantees you a shorter life. A lot of things that we do, claiming to be sowing our wild oats, don't just have an impact for the next 24 hours. They may have an impact for the next 24 years of your life, or even longer. And that very behavior might be the thing that ends your life in some sad tragedy. How many times do we read in the newspaper, or online, or watch the news, or have people in our own lives, in our own school districts, in our own communities, people who just wanted to have a good time after graduation, people who just wanted to have a night of fun before their wedding, people who just wanted to have a good Friday night, and they never have another night again. If is a big word. if he says in verse 8, should live, if a man should live many years, let him rejoice in them all. Rejoice in them all. Can you look back, right? Can you look back on this last year and rejoice in what you've done with it? Can you put your name on that year, place your hat on that year, and rejoice in how you've used the time that's been given to you? Remember what it says in the book of Ephesians chapter 5. The days are, where does he use there? The days are evil. Make the most of your time because the days are evil. Not in the sense that the days are morally evil, but in the sense that time itself is a trickster. Time itself will deceive you. Time itself is an unreliable thing. The days are evil. And you might think you have lots more days, but you are not guaranteed those days. So rejoice in them all, and let them remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. How is it possible that you can rejoice in dark days? That seems a little bit discouraging, doesn't it? Rejoice in those dark days, because there will be many of them. And it's true, there will be many of them. I think in the 21st century, we might not feel this as much in a physical sense, because we wake up every day and we've got comfortable shoes to put on and air-conditioned homes. And if we're hungry, we've got a pantry full of food. And even if the pantry's empty, the worst thing we have to do is, I've got to take the kids to the grocery store, which is the worst thing ever. But I mean, if that's the worst thing that you have in your life is the inconvenience of, we're out of milk, we better go to the grocery store, you've got a very good life. And maybe in the 21st century, we don't realize just how much for most of human history, most people's lives were just not very pleasant. People have lived very unpleasant lives for the majority of human history. So when he says, rejoice in them all, even the bad days, and there are going to be a lot of those, it is true. Now we start to feel those also. As we get older, the debt piles up. As we get older, the health problems start to pile up. As we get older, things that we didn't worry about a few years ago, we start worrying about more and more and more. When your children are small and you can ensconce them in all kinds of safety features, in a safe car seat, in a safe stroller, in a padded crib, when you're able to surround your children with safety when they're so small, you don't worry so much. But then they learn to walk. Are they going to fall down the stairs? Are they going to stick a fork in an electrical outlet? Then they get older and you worry, are they going to get in a car accident when they go out there? Are they going to meet bad friends who will be a bad influence? Are they going to be introduced to evils of this world? Are they going to be the ones on grad night that we read about in the newspaper the next day? Oh, and then they move away. Your kids leave Oregon and they go to Texas. And then they move to Arizona, which is at least a little bit closer to Texas. But we still worry about them, don't we? Yeah, there's a lot of dark days out there. There's a lot of dark days that you face. And yet there's reason to rejoice in them all because God is still God. You are still you. And nothing changes eternity, right? Eternity will always be there. And it's waiting for you. It's waiting for you. Rejoice in them all. Everything that is to come will be futility, he says there. Now go on to verse 8. Notice verse 8, or verse 9, excuse me. Rejoice, young man, during your childhood. Let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood, and follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes. Yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all of these things. Solomon also said in Proverbs 15, verse 13, a joyful heart makes a cheerful face. So rejoice, young man. Rejoice, because these are good years for you. These are good years for you. Now, I like my life. I'm happy with where we're headed. But I don't like paying taxes. And I don't like paying my HOA fee. You know, there's checks that I write now that when I was like 16, I never imagined in my entire life that I'd write such big checks. Remember when you were like 16 and you had a $20 bill and you felt like you were on top of the world? Like, the world's my oyster because I'm at the mall and I've got a 20 in my pocket. Man, I don't think I buy anything now for less than $20. And I write my mortgage payment. And I write my electric bill and I'm crying the entire time. But you know what? I still like my life. But when you're young, enjoy it for what it is. Rejoice, young man, during your childhood. Rejoice during your years of young manhood. You are not burdened with a lot of the same things that adults are. You're not burdened with those things. You have yet to discover some of the tragedies of this life, some of the eccentricities of becoming a grown-up. You haven't discovered them. So what Solomon's advice is, according to Ecclesiastes 11, what Solomon's advice is, follow the impulses of your heart. Now, we've got to have a caveat there. Just remember that God will judge you for what you do. And Solomon's very careful to point that out, isn't he? All right, young man, follow the impulses of your heart. Just remember, at the end of it all, you will be judged. So I don't see Ecclesiastes 11, I don't see this as like carte blanche approval of immoral behavior. Somebody might look at this verse and think that it's approving of sowing your wild oats. Actually, it's not. Solomon is saying the exact opposite. He's saying follow the impulse of your heart with the judgment of God always in mind. Follow the impulses of your heart, but remember, everything that you do is being watched. Everything you do is being recorded. You will be judged for everything that you do. Yes, follow the impulses of your heart, but follow them with the guidance of God, living under the umbrella of His authority and His divine approval. I think that's what the verse is actually saying. Not just do whatever you feel like, but make sure that what you do as you follow the impulse of your heart is what God would approve of. So how would you apply this then? Impulses of your heart, what does he really mean there? You know, when you're young, there's a lot of things you can take up. And I remember when I was in high school, it's like the sky's the limit as far as things you could do, extracurricular activities, books you could read, sports you could play, musical instruments that you could learn. You know, when I was in high school, and I was a lot nerdier than I am now, when I was in high school, I just, hey, if I want to learn a musical instrument, I did. I played the bass, I played the bassoon, I picked up the drums, I picked up the drum set. I picked up a tuba one time and started to learn the tuba. Because when you're young, go for it. Sure, play the tuba when you're young. That's great. And you could do track, and you could do cross country, and you could take up basketball. I mean, when you're young, go for it. Follow the impulse of your heart. Play every sport that you've got time to play. Just make sure you get your homework done, but go for it. Learn to play the guitar. Do it. Because you won't have time for it later. You won't have time for it later. So have fun. When you're 16, enjoy it. Just remember, you're going to be judged for what you do in this life. And just because you're 16, you are not exempt from eternal judgment. And what you do at 16 years old, or 17, or 18, or 20, or 25 will have an impact on who you are and who you turn out to be. Verse 10. So remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. Remove vexation and pain. If that's not a warning against sowing your wild oats, I don't know what is. Is it really fun to live with the consequences of something the day after? Oh, Friday was great, but Saturday morning was rough. Saturday night was great, but Sunday morning was really hard. Postponing something, procrastinating, ignoring, neglecting. At the moment, it seems like it's fine. There's always a consequence. There's always a hangover. There's always something that you have to deal with. Remove vexation and pain. Put those things away from your life. There will be plenty of pain later on. There will be plenty of pain later on. Pain that you didn't bring upon yourself. Don't make life harder than it has to be now. As a young person, don't make it harder than it has to be. It's better to enjoy youth with God in mind and remove the vexation that comes from selfishness and sin and imprudence. Instead of going after the lusts of our eyes, we should enjoy good things, honorable things, pure things. And there are plenty of things on planet Earth that are worth enjoying, that have nothing whatsoever to do with sin. Remember, When God first created this world, before He even put Adam and Eve, what did He look at when He saw creation? What was His assessment of the planet without Adam and Eve? He said, these are good things. This is good. This is good. Food is good. Fruit is good. Grass is good. Trees are good. Pets are good. Dogs are good. I can't bring myself to say it. I'm sorry. Dogs are good. Horses are good. I mean, there's good things. There are things that God objectively, divinely can look at planet Earth and say, this planet is full of great things. There is enough to do on planet Earth without sin ever getting involved. And you know what? If Adam and Eve had not sinned, if they'd never eaten the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is a mouthful, by the way, pun intended, would there have been enough in the Garden of Eden to keep them busy for a lifetime? 10 lifetimes, 100 lifetimes, however long it was that God intended for them to live. There would have been enough for them to do in the Garden of Eden. They would not have been bored. You're not going to be bored in heaven either. Think about that. You will not be bored in heaven. And open up your Bibles here. I've got a great passage here along these lines. Go to the book of Revelation and notice the way that it's put here in Revelation chapter 22. Very last chapter here, okay? Actually, go to chapter 21. I want to pick up here in Revelation 21, verse 22. Notice what it says here. This description of the New Jerusalem, right? He says here, and I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb are its temple. And the city has no need of the sun or the moon or to shine upon it, for the glory of God is illumined. Its lamp is the Lamb. The nations shall walk by its light. The kings of the earth shall bring their glory to it. And in the daytime, for there shall be no night there. Its gates shall never be closed. They shall bring the glory and the honor of the nations into it. And look at verse 27 of Revelation 21. And nothing unclean and nobody who practices abomination and lying shall ever come into it, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. There will not be evil things in heaven. And do you think you're going to be bored there for eternity? No. There will be no evil in heaven, but there also won't be any boredom. Well, what are you going to do on a quiet Saturday night in heaven? If you even have to ask the question, then maybe you don't really want to go to heaven. Maybe you don't really want to go to heaven. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. And it will not last forever. And the dark days will come eventually. Which is why he shifts gears here. When you get into chapter 12, verse 1, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth. Remember who your Creator is. Remember what He created you to be. And I like that He calls Him your Creator, because there's something about that that says you were created to be something. You were designed to do something. You have a function that is a God-given function. He doesn't just say, remember God in the days of your youth, which would be a true statement. Remember your Lord in the days of your youth, which would still be a true statement. He says, remember your Creator. And your Creator has a divine right to tell you how to live. By virtue of the fact that He made you, He has a right to dictate to you how you should live. Remember your Creator. God created sex to be enjoyed in a specific context. God created every single substance on planet Earth to be used for a specific thing, not in a sinful way. The implements of planet Earth, the chemicals of planet Earth, the herbs, the things in nature that you find, the compounds that can be crafted and created through chemistry, everything on planet Earth was created by Him with morality in mind. You got to remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near when you will say, I have no delight in them. Now, time does not allow for us to read the rest of chapter 12. That is a sermon all on its own. And it's kind of a downer sermon. You know, when you're 35 and you're young and healthy, I won a race last night. I won a half marathon. Yeah! But when you're young and 35, you just kind of want to close the book of Ecclesiastes. And I don't feel like reading chapter 12. I don't need a downer right now. This doesn't apply to me. I feel great. The rest of chapter 12, or at least the majority of it, is all about you are going to reach a point in your life where you're not getting stronger anymore. And you're not getting faster anymore. And that metabolism has finally slowed down, and it is not your friend anymore. And the body begins to break down, and the mind begins to break down. Your eyes, your ears, your teeth, your nose, your senses, your drive, those things do begin to break down. And I'll tell you what, for as negative as that seems, it's a blessing for you to reach that stage. The only way that you can reach it is if you've remembered your Creator in the days of your youth. Because if you make all these mistakes as a young person and you destroy your life and destroy your body and you kill yourself because of bad choices, yeah, Ecclesiastes 12 is rough. It's hard to read that chapter on old age. It is hard to read that chapter. But you'll never reach that point at all if you destroy your life through bad decisions. You'll never reach it at all. So I want to make an application here as we bring our lesson to a close. Is it really true that I can get sin out of my system? Sow your wild oats now while you can, because someday you'll have to settle down, and then you can start acting responsibly and maturely and act like a grown-up. Can I really get sin out of my system? The problem with believing that you can get sin out of your system is that you're forgetting that every sin does have a consequence to it. Everything has a price. Everything has a price. And many sins that are committed in youthful indulgence may end up leading to lifelong unhappiness. Marriage, for example. And I'm going to say something that seems very strange coming out of my mouth because you know I'm a big advocate of marriage. I have a very happy marriage, and I was very young when I got married also. Have not regretted it for a moment. Marriage is one way that you can really quickly ruin your life, though. When you make the wrong call on marriage, when you go into marriage thinking there's a backdoor exit if you ever need it, when you go into marriage thinking, hey, we just, wild weekend in Las Vegas, let's go and get married, let's see what happens, and we can always get the marriage annulled or get a divorce. When you go into marriage without really thinking through the implications of what a lifelong spiritual commitment to another soul is, when you go into marriage thinking that it is not in fact one flesh, right? Two become one, and they're bound together as long as they both live. If that's not how you've gone into marriage, then maybe marriage is something that will really ruin your life later. And I've known a lot of young people who got married and they made the wrong decision. And just a few years later, here they are in a situation that, at least according to Matthew chapter 19, verses 9 through 12, has a lifelong consequence. If you take Jesus at His word, and I sure hope that you do, Jesus means business when He talks about marriage. And there is only one reason in God's eyes that you can get a divorce from somebody and remarry and not be sinning. And that's if you've put your wife away for his or her, or for your spouse away for his or her own adultery. Aside from that, that's it. Aside from that, that's it. So His disciples ask Him a few verses later, if the marriage bond is really like that, wouldn't it just be better not to get married at all? And I think Jesus kind of shrugs and says, you know what? Not everybody can accept the conditions for marriage. Not everybody can accept this. And if you can't accept it, then don't get married. If you cannot accept God's standard for marriage, then you'd better not get married. Because that is a lifelong commitment with lifelong consequences if you violate that relationship. And of course there's other things as well, but that's just one example off the top of my mind, where you can see a decision now is going to impact you not just for a few days, like a hangover after a rough Friday night, But we're talking about a lifetime of effects because of one consequence, or because of one cause, excuse me. But then the second problem with this wild oats mentality is thinking that we can get sin out of our systems by committing that very sin and then inadvertently trapping ourselves in it forever. Can you have sex just one time in life and be good the rest of your years? Really? Is that really something that you can get out of your system? Drinking. Can you just drink one time? I want to have the bender of all benders with all my friends and just one time in my life get slobbering drunk, have a great time, run over a mailbox, and not remember anything the next morning, and then I'm good. That's all. I just want to do it really hard one time, and I'm good the rest of my life. Is that really how that works? Really? Is that really how that works? I think you've bought into a really big lie that Satan is selling you. That somehow committing a sin is going to kind of cleanse it from your system somehow? No. Like people poisoned by working in a coal mine in the 1890s or something. You get that in your system and it will be there the rest of your life, which, like a coal miner in the 1890s, might not be very long. Sin is not something that you can kind of expunge from your system. In fact, sin is something that gets into your system, like crystals of methamphetamine, that even years and years and years after you've quit, meth addicts still have tiny crystals of methamphetamines in their system that at any moment can break off and reignite the addiction for the rest of your life. You don't get it out of your system, you put it in your system. So I wonder, what is God's recommendation then for sin? Well, go to 2 Timothy chapter 2. Instead of indulging, remember, Timothy was a younger man. He was a younger man, and I'm sure that he had some of the same temptations that any younger man is going to have. But look at this advice in 2 Timothy chapter 2 and in verse 22. In fact, let's go back to verse 20 just for context, because I really like what he says here about vessels of honor in verse 20 and 21. Now in a large house there are not only gold and silver vessels, but also vessels of wood and earthenware, and some to honor and some to dishonor. Therefore, if a man cleanses himself from these things, cleanses, right? Do you cleanse yourself from something by putting it into your system? Do you take a cleanse diet by eating more red meat? Right? Is that how a cleanse diet works? I'm going to go ahead and cure myself of fatty foods by eating more fat. I had to go gluten-free this year because I discovered I've got a gluten allergy. Tough on me, right? And I thought maybe I'd just get away with it. There was one day I just wanted something with gluten, and I just thought I'd get away with it. For the next 2 weeks, I was dealing with the consequences of that. Because you can't just get it out of your system by partaking of it. It's not how it works. It's not how it works. So his advice in verse 22 is, now flee from youthful lusts and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. Go back to 1 Timothy chapter 6, and he gives very similar advice in verse 11. But flee from these things, you man of God, and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, perseverance, and gentleness. His advice is not to indulge, but to run away. Get as far away from it as you can, Timothy. When you see sin over here, you run the opposite direction. You don't touch it. You don't taste it. You don't tempt yourself with it. You flee from youthful lusts. My friends, sin is slavery. Romans chapter 6, verses 16 through 21. Sin is slavery. And those who partake of it, they are not going down the path of being freed from sin. They are going down the path of becoming more enslaved with every single indulgence. The Bible unequivocally destroys the notion of sowing your wild oats. Now maybe you're not a young person here. Perhaps you can look back at the mistakes you made in your youth. I hope that you have the courage and you have a clear enough mind to maybe talk to some of our young people sometime, just one-on-one. If you know that you've made those mistakes, you learned something from it, you've been matured by it, talk to our young people sometime. Take your own kids, your grandchildren aside. Take some of the teens here, take them aside sometime and say, remember that lesson Ryan did on sowing your wild oats? I just want you to know something about that. Let me share a little bit of my own story. Be useful. Take that experience and make it useful in the kingdom. Maybe you did commit those sins and they are unresolved. And you kind of buried them or brushed them under the rug and you pretend now like they don't have an impact on you. If you've got to get those out, then root them out right now. Make a confession right now for whatever it is that you have left unresolved in your life. And maybe you are a young person and you are struggling with sin of some kind. Let us know. And if you can't do it by coming forward, then please talk to me. Talk to Jason. Talk to Rick. Talk to our elders about these things. Get the shepherding from our elders that they are so happy, willing, and eager to offer you. Please take advantage of the people at Monte Vista who are here to help you. Or if you'd like to become a Christian right now and put a life of sin behind you, this is as much your opportunity as you're ever going to get. If you want to do that, then please come forward as we stand and sing.